I never expected the most dangerous thing about moving here would be the woman living next door. She wasn't just beautiful, she was untouchable. And yet, the closer I got to her, the harder it became to pretend I didn't want more. The story begins not with fireworks, but with something quieter, something ordinary that lingers in memory long after. The narrator has just moved into his new apartment, carrying boxes up narrow stairs, his shirt clinging from the summer heat. He notices her for the first time not through introduction, but through presence. A door across the hall opening, soft light spilling out, and a woman stepping into view with the kind of calm confidence that makes the air shift. She is not hurried. Her movements are graceful, practiced, the way someone who has learned to move through the world without needing to prove herself carries herself. She offers a smile, one that feels both polite and personal at once, and says something simple, like, "Looks like you've had a long day." The narrator, in his early 20s, is struck not only by her beauty, but by her presence. She is older, yes, but not in a way that feels distant. Rather, she feels grounded, like she belongs fully in herself. Her hair falls just past her shoulders, a subtle glint of silver catching the hallway light. There's an elegance to the way she stands barefoot in her doorway, holding a glass of wine as though she's been enjoying a quiet evening until interrupted by his arrival. The exchange is short. She tells him her name, and he tells her his. She offers help, though not in the way of carrying boxes, but in the way of neighborly kindness. If you need sugar, or a screwdriver, or just a moment to breathe, I'm across the hall. It feels casual, but the narrator hears something beneath her words, an openness, an invitation that isn't really about sugar or tools at all. As the days pass, their interactions remain brief, but each one seems to last longer in memory than it should. At the mailbox, she teases him lightly about the stack of pizza coupons he pulls out, and he notices the faint curve of amusement at her lips. In the laundry room, she asks about the guitar he sometimes plays late at night, and admits she finds herself listening through the walls. He catches himself noticing details, the faint scent of jasmine perfume that seems to follow her, the way she pauses before unlocking her door as though she's considering saying more. She notices, too, though she tries to hide it, how his gaze lingers a second too long, how his voice softens when he says her name. These are not yet moments of confession or boldness. They are threads, fragile, subtle, weaving something between them. And yet, the narrator feels the pull growing, not in a rush of reckless passion, but in a quiet awareness that the woman across the hall is not just a neighbor. She is a story waiting to unfold. And though neither of them names it yet, they both feel it, a dangerous softness beginning to bloom in the most ordinary corners of their lives. The next chapter of our story didn't arrive with grand declarations, but through the small coincidences that life seems to favor when two people are meant to notice each other. It began with something as ordinary as the rain, a sudden downpour on a late afternoon, the kind that turns sidewalks into rivers and makes strangers gather under awnings. I had no umbrella, just a bag of groceries clutched to my chest, when I turned the corner and saw her already there, my neighbor, standing beneath the narrow shelter outside our building. Her hair was damp at the ends, curling slightly from the mist. She looked over at me, smiling with a kind of knowing sympathy, and shifted just enough to give me space beside her. Our shoulders almost brushed, the sound of rain filling the silence between us. We spoke softly, about the weather, about the unpredictability of this city, and though the conversation was light, the nearness of her presence was something I felt in every sense. The air smelled of rain and the faint sweetness of her perfume, and I remember thinking how strange it was to feel comfort in the company of someone who was still, in many ways, a stranger. That evening wasn't the last time our paths crossed like that. Another day, I saw her struggling with grocery bags, heavier than they looked, and instinct moved me before thought. I carried them up the stairs to her door. She insisted she could manage, but there was a softness in the way she let me help, as if she secretly liked not having to be strong for a moment. Inside her apartment, she offered me tea as thanks. I accepted, and for the first time, I sat across from her in her kitchen. It was warm and inviting, filled with the faint aroma of spices and the delicate clutter of a life lived with care. She spoke of her balcony garden, herbs, flowers, a small tomato plant she nursed through the summer heat. She mentioned her daughter, grown and living in another city, her pride showing in the way her eyes softened when she said her name. In return, I found myself speaking of my own uncertainties, about work that felt temporary, about searching for a place to call home. She listened, really listened, her chin resting in her hand, her eyes steady on mine. When she handed me the mug of tea, her fingers brushed mine, and though it was nothing more than an accident, the warmth lingered long after. It struck me then, she wasn't just a neighbor. She was someone I wanted to know, someone whose company turned ordinary minutes into something I carried with me afterward. And if she felt the same, she hit it well. Except, perhaps, in the way her eyes stayed on me a moment too long before she looked away. It was one of those evenings that felt suspended in time, when the air is neither warm nor cool, when the world seems to quiet just enough to let two people hear their own thoughts. She had invited me to her balcony, almost casually, after we bumped into each other in the hallway. "The view's better with company," she'd said, and though it sounded lighthearted, there was something in her eyes that suggested she wanted me there. Her balcony was small, but strung with a line of delicate fairy lights, their glow soft against the backdrop of the city. The faint hum of traffic below seemed distant, softened by the cocoon of this space she had made her own. We sat side by side, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence, though not quite touching. She poured wine into 2 glasses and handed me one. Her fingers grazed mine for the briefest moment, a brush so subtle it could have been dismissed as nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was a spark, quiet and undeniable. We talked about trivial things at first, the kind of safe topics that carry no weight. But slowly, the conversation deepened. She told me about the nights she couldn't sleep, how she sometimes sat out here listening to the city until dawn. I told her about the uncertainty I felt in this stage of my life, about trying to figure out where I belonged. She listened, her gaze steady, as though my words mattered more than I had ever thought they could. And then there was silence. Not the heavy kind, but the charged kind. I caught her looking at me, not just a glance, but a lingering gaze that held me in place. It was the kind of look that says more than words ever could. For a second, I almost leaned closer, drawn by something I didn't dare name. But she was the first to break. Her smile faltered, her eyes darted away, and she exhaled softly, as if releasing something she had been holding in. "You don't realize," she said quietly, almost to herself. "This is dangerous." Her voice carried no anger, no sharpness, only a tremor, a confession wrapped in warning. It was as though she was speaking not just to me, but to herself. I wanted to answer, to ask her what she meant, to tell her that I already knew. But the weight of her words held me still. So instead, I stayed silent, letting the night settle around us. The space between us felt alive, more powerful than touch itself. The brush of her arm against mine, the nearness of her body, the way her breath caught when I shifted closer, all of it pulsed with a tension neither of us was ready to name. That night, when I left her balcony, I carried her words with me. Dangerous. Not because it was wrong, but because it was real. After that night on the balcony, nothing was quite the same. Her words, "This is dangerous," stayed with me like a whisper I couldn't forget. I found myself replaying them, wondering if they were meant as a warning to me, or as a reminder to herself. Either way, something had shifted. The invisible line between us had been drawn, and now every step, every glance, felt like testing its edge. The next morning, I noticed it immediately. She was different. The warm ease with which she used to greet me had cooled into something more careful. When I caught her at the mailbox, she offered a polite smile but kept her distance, as if even standing too close might betray something. Her words were shorter, her tone lighter, a little too light, like someone trying too hard to keep things safe. Days passed like that. Conversations at the door that once lingered now ended quickly. The door that used to stay open while she spoke now closed just a bit faster. She wasn't unkind, never unkind, but the warmth that had drawn me in was buried under layers of restraint. And yet, distance didn't erase the pull. If anything, it deepened it. I remember one evening in particular. I was heading upstairs just as she was coming down, her hand brushing the stairwell railing as if she were lost in thought. Our eyes met in passing, and though she tried to keep moving, we had to turn sideways to fit past one another. In that narrow space, our shoulders touched, just for a second, but the world seemed to pause. Her breath caught, soft and sharp, before she stepped away, almost too quickly. That moment stayed with me, because I knew then, she wasn't pulling back because she didn't care. She was pulling back because she cared too much. I began to notice the cracks in her restraint. The way her gaze lingered a heartbeat longer before she looked away. The way her laughter, when I managed to draw it out, sounded freer than she wanted it to. The way she avoided me, but never completely. As if she couldn't quite close the door all the way. Inside me, a quiet struggle grew. Part of me wanted to respect her distance, to give her the safety she was asking for. But another part, the deeper part, wanted to close that distance, to tell her that the danger she feared was nothing compared to the emptiness of pretending. So we drifted in that in-between space, close enough to feel each other's presence, far enough to pretend it meant nothing. Each brush of her hand when passing me something, each glance that held a second too long, each silence heavy with what neither of us dared to say, it was all fuel for a fire neither of us wanted to admit was burning. And beneath it all, I felt it, the storm building. Quiet, patient, waiting for the moment when neither of us could hold it back any longer. The storm came on a night that felt almost scripted by fate. The sky had been restless all evening, clouds heavy and brooding, the air thick with electricity. By the time the first crack of thunder rolled across the city, the power in our building flickered, then gave out entirely. The hallways were swallowed in darkness, the hum of everyday life replaced by silence broken only by the storm outside. I had just lit a candle in my apartment when there was a soft knock on my door. It was her, my neighbor. She stood there holding a small lantern, the golden glow painting her features in shadows and light. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled faintly and asked, "Do you want some company? Storms always feel less heavy when you're not alone." I followed her back to her apartment, where the flickering candles turned familiar walls into something softer, more intimate. The rain drummed steadily against the windows, lightning flashing now and then, illuminating the curve of her profile as she moved around the room. We sat across from each other at her kitchen table, the shadows dancing between us. At first, our words were light, about the weather, about how fragile the city's power grid always seemed to be. But there was a restlessness in her movements, the way she traced the rim of her glass with her fingertip, the way her eyes avoided mine for too long. Finally, she exhaled, as though giving in to something she'd been holding back. "You don't understand," she said softly, her voice trembling just enough to betray the strength she usually carried. "You're too young. People would talk. I can't. I can't afford to let myself feel this." Her words cut through the silence like a confession and a plea all at once. She wasn't just warning me anymore. She was revealing herself, revealing the fear beneath her distance. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. "I know it feels dangerous. I know what people might say, but maybe that's what makes it worth it. Maybe the best things in life are the ones we're afraid to reach for." She stared at me then, her eyes wide, as if she hadn't expected me to meet her honesty with my own. The candlelight flickered between us, casting shadows across her face, softening her in a way that made her look both strong and achingly vulnerable. When I placed my hand over hers, I felt the slightest tremor, not of rejection, but of surrender. She didn't pull away. Her hand stayed beneath mine, warm, delicate, her thumb brushing unconsciously against my skin. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything we hadn't said, of everything we finally allowed ourselves to feel. And in that moment, with the storm raging outside, I knew we had crossed into something neither of us could undo. The storm had passed, but the air inside her apartment still felt electric. The candles burned low, their flames soft and steady, casting golden halos across the walls. The silence between us stretched, not heavy, not awkward, but alive, carrying the weight of everything we'd both just confessed. She sat close, her chair drawn nearer without either of us realizing when it had happened. The distance that once felt carefully guarded was gone. Now, only inches remained. I could feel her presence, not just as a neighbor or a friend, but as someone I wanted, someone who wanted me too, though she was still trying to fight it. Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and for once, she didn't look away. There was vulnerability there, raw and unmasked, but also a quiet strength, as if she had decided, just for this moment, to stop resisting what had been building between us all along. I raised my hand slowly, not wanting to startle her, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. My fingertips grazed her temple, trailing lightly down to her cheek. Her eyes fluttered closed, a soft exhale leaving her lips, and for the first time she leaned into my touch instead of pulling away. "You make me forget the rules," she whispered, her voice barely audible but certain, like a truth she had carried too long. My chest tightened at her words, because I knew she wasn't speaking only about me. She was speaking about herself, about the wall she had built, the life she had structured so carefully. And in this moment, she was letting those walls slip. She shifted closer, her shoulder brushing mine, her hand hesitating before resting lightly against my chest. I could feel the warmth of her palm, the steadiness of her touch trembling with something unspoken. When she finally leaned forward, she didn't kiss me, not yet. Instead, she rested her forehead against my chest, her breath warm through the fabric of my shirt. Her arms slid around my waist, slow and deliberate, as if she needed to know she was safe here, in this choice, in me. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her carefully, reverently. The rhythm of her breathing matched my own, and for a moment, the rest of the world faded. No neighbors, no whispers, no rules, only this quiet surrender. It wasn't passion that overtook us. It was relief. Relief at no longer pretending. Relief at finally giving in to something that had always been there, waiting in the spaces between our words and silences. She lifted her head slightly, her cheek brushing against mine, her lips so close I could feel the warmth of them without contact. But she paused, as if asking silently whether this was truly allowed. I didn't rush her. I only held her tighter, letting her feel that my answer wasn't just yes, it was everything. And in that unspoken moment, the line between us was crossed. Not recklessly, not carelessly, but with the quiet certainty of two people finally choosing each other. The days that followed were quieter, but not in the same way as before. The silence between us was no longer tense with restraint. It was filled with something softer, something shared. It was in the little things. The way she lingered at her door in the mornings, waiting just long enough for me to step out so we could walk down the stairs together. The way her laughter came easier now, unguarded, as if she had finally let herself stop worrying about how it might sound. The way her hand brushed mine when we passed in the hallway, not accidental anymore, but intentional, a small reminder of what we had chosen. One morning, before the city had fully woken, she asked if I wanted to take a walk. The streets were still damp from last night's rain, the sky pale with the first hints of sunrise. The world felt hushed, as if holding its breath for us. We walked side by side, close but not yet touching. And then, almost naturally, her hand slipped into mine. No hesitation, no apology. Her fingers laced with mine as though they had always belonged there. The simplicity of it struck me harder than any words could. That quiet act, holding hands in the morning light, felt more intimate than the stormlit confessions, more daring than any whispered secret. It wasn't hidden anymore. It wasn't something we could dismiss as a moment of weakness. It was a choice. She glanced at me, her lips curving into a smile that was both shy and certain. For the first time, she didn't try to disguise the way she looked at me, with warmth, with trust, with something that was finally free. We stopped at a small cafe just opening for the day, its windows glowing with the soft amber of early light. Sitting across from her, sipping coffee, I couldn't help but notice the way she seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. She still carried the grace and composure that first drew me in, but now there was something more, a quiet joy that revealed itself in the way she reached across the table to rest her hand over mine. I realized then that the danger she once whispered about wasn't gone. People might still talk. Doubts might still creep in. But the truth was stronger. The danger was worth it, because it had led us here, to honesty, to connection, to something real. As we walked back home, the sun climbed higher, painting the buildings gold. She leaned into me slightly, her shoulder brushing mine, her laughter soft against the hum of the waking city. And in that moment, with her hand in mine and the world unfolding around us, I knew the story wasn't about danger anymore. It was about the quiet courage it takes to choose each other, and the peace that comes when you finally do.